our guest, Milton Grimes, who famously represented Rodney King. And also, we're going to have Vanita Banks, our superstar researcher, Masters in Tax. But we start off today with a superstar in his own right, Fred Payne. Fred Payne is the Director of Workforce Development for the state of Indiana, and a lot of people consider that the unemployment office. And so we brought Fred. We brought Fred onto the show. We have so many people talking about unemployment benefits and things like that. So we thought that it's important that we discuss this subject. Now, Fred came to the Department of Workforce Development. He previously worked in the practice, a law firm, but then he became a lead executive at Honda Manufacturing here in Indiana. He became the chief administrator, where he was responsible for the business division. He also was over diversity. He was general counsel. He did legal, IT, accounting, corporate affairs, you name it. Fred worked there for a while, did outstanding work, and he was recruited by our governor to assist in this important endeavor. The governor wanted to make sure he had diversity within his staff, and so he got a superstar lawyer to assist him in that endeavor. And so since then, Fred has been running a very complex organization, and we're going to talk about a few of the issues today that he's encountered in terms of this process. A lot of people realize that how difficult it is in terms of these unemployment benefits. So we're going to talk about it. Fred Payne, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. Now, tell the our audience, Fred, also listeners, we're also on YouTube. It's Nathaniel Lee, Legal Issues of Today. We're also on Facebook. It's Nathaniel Lee, and LinkedIn. So we won't be stopping even during commercial breaks, so you could join us on one of those social media outlets. Okay. Now, what does your agency do? And tell us about it real quickly. How big is it?
Okay, the Department of Workforce Development is the state's employment and reemployment agency that's responsible for connecting people and employers to the right career resources. And we do that in three focus areas. One is workforce training. The other one is apprenticeship and work-based learning. And the third one is unemployment insurance. On workforce training, essentially what we do there is we help individuals, we provide them with career services such as job training, resume building, and job searching, and we also connect them to employers. We also make sure that we provide certain credentials that are of high wage and high value that individuals can get free of charge. We're also responsible for running the state's high school equivalency program for those individuals who were not able to receive a high school diploma. We ensure that they're able to get what's called a high school equivalency today. So that's on the workforce training side. Then in 2018, right around the time that I came into this role, a few months afterwards, we started what's called the Office of Work-Based Learning and Apprenticeship. And the sole purpose of that office is to expand apprenticeship and work-based learning opportunities throughout the state. And the third focus area, is that we administer what's called the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. And out of that Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund, part of that administration is providing the facilitation of unemployment insurance benefits to individuals who are out of work due to no reason of their own.
Well, okay, the big question is, explain to us, we had this terrible pandemic, and then we got federal benefits. Explain to us the process, the benefits people receive, and when does a program end?
Okay. So generally speaking, our state unemployment insurance benefits are provided to a general set of people who, as I said earlier, who are out of work due to no reason of their own. They need to have had some work history and some history of wages. The max weekly benefit to an individual is $390 a week. Essentially, 47% of a person's weekly income up to a max of $390 a week. So they apply for that benefit, and there's a process that we have to go through to determine their eligibility. An employer can protest on whether or not that person is eligible for benefits, and we help adjudicate that process. So that's the general state process. So back when the pandemic started, back in March of 2020, the federal government created several new programs to provide additional benefits to individuals. One significant one was what they call the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, or better known as PUA. And this program provided unemployment insurance benefits to a group of individuals who were never before entitled to unemployment benefits. That group of individuals is considered the gig workers and independent contractors, and even individuals who may not otherwise be eligible. So that was a big classification of people, a new classification of people who are eligible for benefits. So that's one federal program. The other federal program that was implemented is what I'm going to call, in simple terms, an additional weekly add-on. When the pandemic started, the federal government added on an additional $600 per week to any individual who was eligible for at least $1 of unemployment insurance benefits. That $600 add-on went through July of 2020. There was another program that extended the 26 weeks that a person is normally eligible for unemployment to a little bit over 50-something weeks, and here recently with the last piece of legislation, it extended it to a little bit over 72 weeks.
And so I saw an interview with the governor. He's saying that the supplemental payment that were paid this year was going to end. Is that program end this month? And what program was he referring to?
So those will be the federal programs. The federal programs that I mentioned earlier, it was initially $600 a week add-on. Now it's $300. So that program will expire on June 19th. The other federal program for the gig workers and independent contractors, that program will also end on June 19th. And the federal extensions will end on June 19th. So essentially, all of the federal programs that have been put in place will be ended on June 19th. And what will be left would be the state-based program. Essentially, we will be going back to what we call pre-pandemic mode in unemployment insurance. So the only people who will be eligible going forward would be the people who would have normally been eligible before the pandemic for state unemployment insurance benefits.
Well, one of the concerns that people articulated all over the country is that during the unemployment benefit payment last year, there was an extensive backlog. And what were the factors that led to the backlog? I know we had millions of people that were filing benefits. Well, what were the other factors that resulted in a backlog in the payment of benefits last year?
Oh, that's a great question, Nate. Let me try to put this in perspective a little bit in terms of magnitude. I want to go back a little bit to 2019. So in the year 2019, in Indiana, we paid 82,000 individuals unemployment insurance benefits, 82,000. In 2020, essentially the months from March 2020 through the end of December 2020, we paid 797,000 individuals unemployment insurance.
Wow, that's incredible.
So you see the difference, the magnitude there. We went from an average of about 2,500 claims a week at the beginning of March, and then around between the second and third week of March, we had 130,000 people file in 1 week. So we had an increase, a sharp increase that came upon us pretty quickly. And we were staffed, just like all the other agencies around the country, we were all staffed to what we had been accustomed to over the past few years, about 2,500 claims per week. So just like all of the other unemployment insurance divisions within the country, we had to quickly adjust to the moment, which meant that we had to develop a quick strategy to address this extreme high volume of claims, and we had to put some speed around it. In addition to that, we had these new federal programs that weren't in existence prior to March. So we had to put those up. And when you're talking about distributing millions, and actually it ended up being billions of dollars, those are sophisticated IT systems that must be put in place. And so when they were put in place pretty quickly, there was no time to do a year's worth of troubleshooting. High-tech IT systems like this, it takes about a year, 2 years to put them in place because you have a lot of troubleshooting. We had to put them up in a matter of days and weeks. So what happened in terms of, the slowness of claims processing? You had a system that was designed for not the volume that we had, and you had only state-based programs initially. Now you have 2 to 3 additional programs. So that led to a lot of claims that did not get paid within the 21-day time period. So our average, what we wanted to try to keep was that 85% of the claims that were filed, we wanted to make sure that we paid them within a 21-day average time period. That was the goal before the pandemic. That was the goal during the pandemic. And in order for us to do that, we knew that we would have to lean in on 3 things: automation, technology, and increase our human capital support. So we did those, and we were able to continue to pay 85% of the people within 21 days. But that 10 to 15% went beyond 21 days. Those were the claims that had to have an actual person touch. So, for example, if an employer protested a claim, that meant that an individual claims adjuster would have to do an investigation, and they would have to pull documents and engage with the employer and the individual. So that takes time. And so when you magnify that by tens or 100,000 people, you can see how just the sheer volume of that is going to slow the process down.
One final question on this: that you experienced a massive fraud outbreak when that claim process commenced?
Yes, that's also, I'm glad that you brought up fraud. Now, as I talked about some of the contributing factors to the claims process and people getting their claims paid within a certain time frame, one other factor that came into play that really slowed things down, and it continues to slow things down, is fraud. With the amount of federal benefits going out, it became sort of a haven for the fraudsters. As an example, in 2019, we paid $237 million in claims payments. In 2020, we paid $6.6 billion. So you can see that was a haven for fraudsters to try to get some of that money. So we had an increase in identity theft. We had an increase in what we call claims hijacking. Unemployment insurance fraud has a wide range, anything from an individual who is trying to continue to collect unemployment insurance benefits beyond the time that they're unemployed, all the way through these international fraud rings who take people's identifications, they buy them on the dark web, and then they try to file for unemployment insurance benefits in someone else's name. Or they can do what's called claims hijacking. They get a person's personal identifiable information or their password. They go into their account, and they redirect payments from the individual's bank account to their own bank account. And just as an example of how drastic and how massive the fraud was or is, it continues to be this way. but we've been able to put things in place to stop it. To date, we've had 26 million auditors trying to attack our system. 26 million.
Wow.
That's a lot of bots. So right now, the thing that I want to make sure that your listeners are being careful about is that the fraudsters are sending out text messages, talking and asking them to click on a link to get more information about their unemployment insurance benefits. When a person clicks on the link, it allows the fraudsters to get their personal information, and then they can hijack their claim. The DWD will not send a text message to you. So be careful about these phishing attempts for unemployment insurance.
Now, if somebody needs to get in contact with somebody at your office, what phone number should they call? Last question. What's the number to get in contact if they have an issue with unemployment benefits, fraud, or otherwise?
They should go to unemployment.in.gov, and then that will provide them with the additional information to make sure that they can get in contact with someone.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Payne. We thank you for your service, and particularly in the area of diversity. So thank you very much for participating today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Now we go to our superstar panel, and the issue last time, as you recall, we started talking about this critical race theory that I know a lot of you out there, when I went to events, you want to talk about this. And so let's start off with Attorney Banks. What is this critical race theory, or Attorney Grimes, what is it, and what's the why it's become such a hot political button on the Republican side?
Good morning, Attorney Lee and Grimes. It's really a pleasure to be with you again this morning. And critical race theory originated in the 70s. And we hear the term critical race theory movement. It commenced as an academic movement of civil rights scholars and activists in the mid-70s. The Harvard professor Derek Bell is one of those brilliant scholars that studied critical or introduced critical legal studies, and it treats race as central to law and policy in the United States, and that racism is an integral part of the structure of our legal institutions, and it examines social, cultural, and legal issues related to race and racism. It advocates and recognizes and calls out white supremacy and white privilege, and that many economic, social, and inequities in our nation are derived from a systemic, the existence of systemic racism throughout our institutions, whether that be in healthcare, housing, education, and social justice, and our environment.
Okay, now before Attorney Grimes, let's take one caller, then we're going to have Attorney Grimes. And listeners also, don't forget, when they go to commercial break, you can go to one of the YouTube channels or Facebook. Producer, we have a caller. James, you have a question for us today.
Yes, if I want you want to be ready for my question, too.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, James. What was your question?
I really had a question about that unemployment, sir. The unemployment. I also have a question for Attorney Lee. If I got a a criminal state issue in another state, and I want to know would Attorney Lee office be able to provide me with some legal assistance with another lawyer that practices in the state of Texas? And the question for the unemployment situation is that I currently was terminated from my employment after 3 years of being employed, and the company protesting the employment by saying there was a policy violation, and I appealed it, and right now it's in the appeal process, and they told me that I would have to go before a judge after he would determine whether or not the claim would be honored or not. So I'm in the process of waiting till I hear from the judge. So what my question about that is, if this does not turn out in my favor, what options do I have after I go before the judge?
Well, two things. You probably should contact LSO and get a free lawyer to represent you in the unemployment case, because you may want to do some discovery or something. But secondly, on the criminal case, you should probably consider, you could talk to Attorney Grimes here today, because he does, I don't do criminal practice, but Attorney Grimes does. He had a national practice. You had a question about a crime in Texas for Attorney Grimes?
I didn't understand what the problem was, but yeah, I have practice in Texas. What's your question?
Okay. Can I get a phone number where I can reach you off the air?
Sure. 323-295-3023.
3023.
Yes.
That'll be 295-3023.
Correct. 323 area code. Okay.
Oh, 323 area code. Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
All right.
I need it, sir. Could you please give me that information again about what I need to do about the unemployment situation? You said I need to get them in an attorney. How would I go about doing that?
Well, contact Legal Service Organization, and they will represent you for free.
Legal services, okay.
Yes, sir. I don't have the number in front of me, but you can look them up on the internet. Legal Service, they used to be in my building, but they moved last year during the pandemic. But just contact them on Monday, and that's very important. And because you probably need to get representation, because there are some legal requirements for the employer to deny you benefits. They have to terminate you for just cause, and just cause is a legal standard. However, there's a lot of factors go in, and your lawyer could give you advice as to how you properly present your case before the administrative law judge, okay?
I do appreciate it, and I thank y'all. Y'all done a wonderful job, and we appreciate the service to the community.
Okay. Now, Attorney
Grimes is my name. Grimes. Thank you, Mr.
Well, Attorney Banks had talked about the critical race theory, and I want to go back to this, Attorney Grimes. On previous shows, you had pointed out some of the disparities within the legal justice system.
Yes, sir.
And one of the things that was educational, at least from my standpoint, is that you talked about the case in Virginia where the African-American judge took out all of the photographs
Yes, sir.
in the courtroom because he thought that was some evidence of systematic bias.
Yes, sir.
Look, even
And so in your practice in California,
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
maybe it's different. You know, we're here in Indiana, and of course, all across the country, you have different demographics, different political ideology. But in general, though, how has this issue of racism in the criminal justice system changed over the years? Is it just as bad today as it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago? It's gotten better.
Just as bad. It doesn't appear that prosecutors, at least in the area of California I practice in, which is Orange County and Los Angeles County, and really up and down the state. But here recently in those two counties, because of the pandemic limiting travel, the prosecutors act as though I am a man from out of space when I talk about consideration of the individual's race and ethnicity here in resolving a case matter and talking about diversion or getting alternative to the criminal justice system, let's say for a first offender. They act like they haven't heard of the George Floyd case or the judge in Virginia who says, I'm removing pictures of all these white men in this courtroom because it presents an atmosphere of racism. And I don't think a black man or woman can receive a fair trial in this courtroom environment from a jury who is looking up to all this whiteness as a superiority. And it goes to white supremacy mentality of people. That's the issue with this critical race theory. I'm so glad Vanita Banks took on the definition in the history aspect of critical race theory. I quickly looked it up. And the problem with it now is that Donald Trump, back in September of 2020, released an executive order, excuse me, Nate, counseling consideration of ethnicity and race in government contracts, no longer to be considered, is my understanding, a part of this problem. So civil rights activists are saying, no, you can't do that. You have to consider diversity and racial equality and slavery and all of the social problems we've had in this country, especially where Black people have been victims. You got to think about it. You got to consider this in giving out government contracts. But Mr. Trump, in following the dictates and the plan of enhancing and enforcing white superiority and racism, is saying, my understanding is, no, we won't consider those things in extending government contracts to people. And so that's going to the legal system too, Nate. There is, it's written almost, but I'll say it's an unwritten rule that they got to keep African Americans incarcerated, keep us locked down and in prison, and treat us as second-class citizens throughout this judicial system, throughout housing, throughout all of the professions that we are trying to get in. Look at what happened with the NFL. You know, our cognitive functions are not equal to theirs, so they don't have a baseline to decide whether or not we get benefits. Racism is permeating every facet of our society, not just the justice system, everything.
Attorney Banks. Oh, go ahead. Back to that critical race. What were you saying now? Go ahead.
I was going to say that we can't cancel, you know, our history, and critical race theory advocates that race and racism is a means by which society allocates privilege and status, and there's a hierarchy as to who gets the best jobs, who goes to the best schools, who has the best opportunities. Several just everyday examples. There was one recently in the news where a Black female had to have a white person stand in for her in order to sell her home at its valid fair market value. We know the statistics state that Black homes have a lower market value of up to $10,000 less. Black people pay more than the average white male that Black people pay more than the average white male pays for the same car. And so, as Attorney Grimes just stated, racism permeates our society, and critical race theory is used to understand these issues of, for example, in the education setting, to understand issues of school discipline and why African American children are more likely to be suspended from school, or kicked out of school. And so it permeates, every segment of our society. And it also addresses what is known as revisionist history by re-examining American history and replacing the majority interpretation of the events with the truth and the role of racism, as well as the contributions of African Americans in building the economy here in the United States.
May I say something, Nate, please? Last night I was out to dinner with two friends of mine. We're all in our 70s, and every year we make sure we go to dinner together to see which one is going to be the last standing kind of. We laugh about that. But we were at a restaurant in South Coast Plaza, which is an exclusive shopping area here in Southern California. And we were at an Asian restaurant. And I said, why is it that 90+% of the employees and everybody that works here is of one race, Asians? When we can't find, it pains me to see the lack of African-American businesses and wealth in a concentrated area like other racial groups have done. And I thought, I can't knock my people as much as I do sometimes, because we can do that. We have did that. That Tulsa massacre wiped out over 1,000 structures and killed hundreds of people, but it was hospitals, restaurants, theaters, you name it. People had their own central location. They didn't have to go outside of that location, and they burned it down and wiped it off the map and dared it to be spoken of. Dared it to be spoken about. And that was like, to me, proof of we can do like other races do in this country. We can have our own existence. We don't have to rely upon others for our needs. So there is something causing this diversion and this division and this killing, young African men killing each other. I swear I've never seen so much killing in my 47 years of practicing law as I have in the past 3 or 4 months. For some reason, every week there's another shooting coming through my office, Nate. So this critical race theory saying no by Donald Trump, you don't consider the race and the diversity anymore. Everybody is, I don't even think they say equal, but we can't give any advantage to the minorities for all that they've been deprived of. That's bull.
Okay, let's go to the line and get one of the callers. Okay, producer, hey, thank you callers for holding. Okay, you got a question for Milton or Vanita or myself. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Lee, first of all, thanks for having me on, and good morning to all the other attorneys. Hey, your first guest was talking about once federal unemployment stops here in the state of Indiana, we'll be going back to pre-pandemic Black unemployment levels. And I was just curious as to what that percentage might be. Now, tying it into the critical race theory, is what I'm thinking is that based on what you said and what the other two attorneys addressed this morning, is that critical race theory is going to be something that will affect us economically. And they want people to come back to work. But I'm just curious as to what that percentage might be across the country in terms of Black unemployment as we go forward. So it's more of a comment, a question. Maybe you guys can address that. And again, Attorney Lee, appreciate you having me on. Thanks.
That's a tough question. I don't know the answer to that. Do you, Peter Milton? He raised a number of points, and I don't know how the discrimination will affect the return to work in our country. Here locally, we have help warning signs everywhere. And one of the big arguments we had, of course, is that because with the supplemental payment, people weren't returning to work. We were getting it on both sides of that. And so I don't know, will does this critical race theory have adverse effect on employment today of blacks? I think it does, but to what extent does it matter today?
Does it matter? Vanita, you want to address that?
Well, absolutely. It has. Historically, Black Americans have had higher unemployment rates than white Americans, and we can typically be in some of the more, essential jobs. And my answer would be absolutely yes, that we're starting with higher unemployment numbers, and we are, less likely to be denied, more likely to be denied jobs, homes, apartments, mortgages than similarly situated or even lower qualified white people. And so, yes, absolutely. Our prison population, as Milton was saying, is disproportionately Black. There are historic and continue to be healthcare disparities. And I just wanted to, one of the brilliant scholars, Kimberly Crenshaw, she's one of the founding critical race theorists and a law professor at UCLA and Columbia University. She stated that, and I quote, "Critical race theory is a practice. It's an approach to grappling with the history of white supremacy, which rejects the belief that what's in the past is in the past, and that the laws and systems that grow from that past are detached from it."
Wow. Hey,
Yeah.
Attorney Banks, there's a gentleman got some specific question. Pierre, go ahead, Pierre. You have some questions for Attorney Banks about the issue you were raising?
No, basically, good morning, counselors. Basically, race theory, and it just, came up mainstream or the public consciousness.
Hey, Pierre, can you speak up just a little bit or turn your volume up a little bit? Thank you. Go ahead.
It just basically comes to the fore with the 1619 project. And the fact of the matter is that a lot of white conservatives, Republicans, don't like how the 1619 project has shown how race has affected our laws and our history in this country and why things are the way they are today. You can look around right here in Indianapolis and in Georgia and places like that and see examples of critical race theory in practice when you have, like you guys talked about last week, all the major highways running through Black neighborhoods. And one thing that I know you've been on for the last several years, Nate, is how these Republican legislatures pass laws, cripple Black areas like where you have large minority population. So what they'll do is they'll say your sheriff can only be the sheriff for 2 terms, or you can't elect your judges in your city, but all the white towns and communities across the state, they can vote for their judges and their sheriffs, and they can serve as long as they can get reelected. That's critical race theory in practice, and and the Republicans and conservatives don't like that being taught, and that's what it is.
I agree with this speaker on these points that he's making. The book I just recently read, Robert E. Lee and Me, it talks about those statues and those, like I just finished a lawsuit against the city of Santa Monica, and I learned in that lawsuit how they put the freeway, beautiful freeway, through the minority neighborhood, how they dump how their trash and recycle vehicles park in the minority neighborhood, the Pico neighborhood, how all of the air around the freeway and the trash dump and everything is terrible, and it gives people diseases. It's in the minority neighborhood, and it's like that throughout our country. You talk about, I tease Nate, I used to, about that circle he has in Indianapolis with the great white general. I don't know if it's Robert E. Lee or who, sitting on this horse, and a slave in chains or is on his knees looking up at the great white master, or looking down, but the great white master is superior to him. You can see that. This book talks about how they put these statues up and in places oftentimes to counteract an advancement in civil rights. And they do it with a plan and an understanding. And they're still doing that. So we got, like we said earlier, racism permeates everything about our effing life here in this country. And until we eradicate it, we're going to suffer.
It also affects white people, and especially with this unemployment thing. I think that these governors really, when they cut this unemployment off, they really want to target African Americans and low-income people. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay, next caller, Ron.
Nate and guest, you know,
Go ahead, sir.
I've said this before. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Nate?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Wishing everyone well. Wishing everyone well. Nate, did you hear about the young black girl who had 143 colleges that accepted her and had over, I believe it was around $5 million she was funded, would have been offered for paying for her college? Are you familiar with that?
I don't, I don't read every story, but what was the question?
No. Well, when I often hear people commenting on how bad things are for us, and I agree that they are, however, there is some sunshine out there. There are some bright spots. This young black girl, 143 colleges accepted her, $5 million in scholarship money. I would like to encourage other black people to do their absolute best to try to get ahead in this racist society with all of this racism and with the unlevel playing field. Just put some effort into what you're doing and do your absolute best. Don't let the thought that white people can control you or have anything to do with you. Do your absolute best and get ahead. I just want to encourage black people.
Okay, Attorney Banks.
I agree with the caller that there are success stories out there, and that is certainly one of them that he described. And one of the other callers referenced the 1619 project, which is linked to the New York Times, which is the New York Times 1619 Project Initiative, which purpose and focus was to reframe United States history by putting the narrative of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans, incorporating those two components as part of the national narrative. And Nicole Hannah-Jones, a writer from the New York Times, introduced this 1619 project, which she's been working on for many, many years, as part of the 400th year anniversary of the arrival of the first slaves in America. And we can debate about whether the first enslaved people came to America in 1619. There's evidence, of course, that enslaved Africans came to America as early as the 1500s.
Wow, but my take on this is that we do have a great deal of success stories, like the people on this show, for example. We're all success stories, but we've all experienced some significant impediments. I attended University of Georgia Law School, Milton, Vanita, and the first Black to enter there was like in 1975. So my law school was segregated until 1975, would not admit people because of the color of the skin. The university in general admitted its first Black in 1961, but you know, in the professional schools, it was a little bit slower. So a lot of people don't realize that. And they had the first Black on their football team at the University of Georgia, is a guy named Ken Dias in 1969. You know, so in other words, I agree with the caller. There are significant amount of success stories, but we have a significant impediment. There's one thing I need to tag along with something that Attorney Banks said earlier. When she had talked about we pay a different premium for things such as cars and things like that, I need to point something out to all your listeners. One of the things that I'm just peeved about is the cost that we pay for used cars and cars in the city and the country. The typical African American pays about 15% more for purchase of an automobile. And then we have some dealership that have the temerity to add on gap coverage, they add on maintenance agreement, and they're charging interest rate over 20%. That troubles me because they'll get a $10,000 car that they pay $30,000 for. And I see it every week now. I'm getting so sick of that. It's just one of the things that just galls me. And these folks buy these cars, these inflated charges, and this is not just cars, but the cars is stroking a nerve with me because everybody needs one to get around. And so when Attorney Banks was talking about that, in real life, folks, I see it every week, and I'm so sick of it. So the point is, when you buy a car, shop around a little bit more. Now, let's go back to the phone and take one more caller. Caller, you have a question for us today.
Yes, my question is, I had heard that the $100 million was going to be put into African American community was over the next 5 years, and so I was wondering where it was going to be put. Was it going to be put directly in their hands, or in their neighborhoods, on their housing, or just what?
You say $400 million? I didn't hear the first part of your comment.
$100 million.
And who had paid the $100 million? It's about the Lilly $100 million or what?
Bits and pieces. I forgot the agency. No, not the NAACP. I forget what, but they was talking about it on 1310, and I was trying to find out who it was and just about how were they going to distribute.
The Lilly Corporation gave the National Urban League $100 million, and I called them. They were setting up a program, but they still have the money, according to the person I talked to a week and a half ago, because after this show, there was something that came up, and I was thinking about having them on the show, so I made a call. And what I was told is that they still have the $100 million. They haven't spent it yet. So I'm not really sure what their plans are, but you might call the Urban League to find out what their plans are. I'd like to know. I know inquiring minds would like to know, because I don't know. I have no idea. I'm a member of the Urban League, but I don't know about their financial dealings in terms of this $100 million grant they received from Lilly. I don't know.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. Well, thank you for answering my call. That would be it would be nice. I would like to see it put in responsible people's hands, and maybe they can fix the home, buy a home, whatever the need may be. That. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney, now, your concluding thought on this critical race theory. I mean, where do we go from here? We know about the discrimination in the past, but what can we do, particularly as African Americans, to improve our plight? What do you think we need to do different, if anything?
Well, I wanted to say that critical race theory, again, explores how the history of inequality and racism in the United States has a continuing impact on African Americans today, and that, we talked last week about reparations to repair the descendants of those who perished, and to repair the wealth that the Greenwood District in Tulsa had developed back in 1920. And your caller just talked about monies for individuals to improve homes, for example. And we've mentioned in the past that Evanston, Illinois, is one of the first municipalities that we're aware of in the United States that has established a reparations fund where eligible residents can apply for up to $25,000 for either the purchase of a home or to renovate their homes.
Milton,
Yes,
I'm
sir.
concerned about something you said. I mean, you talked about Tulsa, and even if Attorney Banks' ideology in terms of reparation, but all those people that were murdered, their life was destroyed. So we lost men, women, and children. They lost everything. Reparation not going to bring all of that people. I'm just troubled by this. I mean, in terms of justice in America, I mean, is reparation enough?
They put all these statues around of dead Confederate soldiers, hundreds or thousands of them. Maybe they should get the names together and give a special memorial to the dead or the people who were killed in that massacre. That would be one step forward. To just trivialize their life and what happened there cannot be accepted. There's nothing too big for them to do in recognition of that event, so that it will never happen again. If I may just say something about the critical race theory, I mean, there's a lot of talk about the trillions that are going to be spent in the infrastructure of this country that is sorely needed. There wouldn't make any sense for every contractor, or a lot of the contracts do not involve, it would not make sense if they do not involve minority contractors, not just workers, minority contractors and workers. We got to make our just demand. Pamela Harris got to make sure we get some of those finances from that work project coming out of spending that much money. So it's a lot of work to do ahead of us.
Well, thank you, particularly our guest, Fred Payne, Director of Workforce Development, our superstar panel, Attorney Milton Grimes, Attorney Vanita Banks. And I'd like to thank each and every one of our guests. Next week, we're going to have our show, because of the COVID and the mass amount of people that became disabled, we're going to have a resumption of the Social Security Disability show to talk about benefits and things of that nature next week with Marsha Castle. We thank you for listening in, and always remember that you can also join us on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. On YouTube, Nathaniel Lee, Legal Issue of the Day, Facebook, Nathaniel Lee, and of course, LinkedIn. Well, thank you all and for participating, and stay safe. And thank God that we've got vaccination and we lifting the mask mandate. Thank you all for participating. Thank everybody for getting their shots. And until we meet again, may God bless and keep you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.